Hey guys, welcome to Ignite Cast, our second episode. So we're going into May, so this will be the content that you'll use for your May simulcast, and we are super excited about this new format. And it sounds like many of you are super excited as well. We kind of asked around as we went through our May cohorts, and everyone thought it was super practical. It was nice that you had already gone through the content before we actually met together, and then we could actually apply it and really deep dive into how it applies to your specific disciple making network. So, Dan, how did your April cohorts go after we launched this new process?
I think that so many of the leaders really got good traction, and I think they were able to begin to apply it. And so I loved what happened. Some of the We asked them to really evaluate where they were in the process, and I think there was some really good, honest evaluation. And I think we're really seeing some good relationships build among the people of the cohort. So that's what we were hoping for.
Yeah, my favorite thing about this new model is that the content had already been processed. And so, really, a lot of new application and information came out. I know we had a couple people in our cohort that just live, real time as we were talking, came out with some new ways to apply this and actually new content related to this content. So, it was so fun. It was almost like co-creating a next level of content based on what we did on the simulcast.
And I said before, it's kind of like before when we did the simulcast, it was kind of like coming to church because you didn't know for sure if you'd be with the same people again. Now we're building cohesion and relationship because I really want to build long enduring relationships. And a couple of them even said they had connected with each other in between after the cohort. They called each other and they
Hmm.
spent some time together. And that kind of relationship is just invaluable for us in the network.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. So we're excited about the new format, excited about the new, almost a breath of fresh air just blowing through Ignite. So it's really awesome. So excited for you guys. So today we are going to not repeat the content we did last month. We're going to really try hard not to do repetition, but we're going to maybe build up on top of it. So the foundation that we built last month with the get it, want it, and have the capacity to do it, we're going to just dive a little bit deeper into that. And you guys know the content, you know the graphics, so we're not going to revisit it, but we want to take it to the next level. And so as we were thinking about this and processing how we could take it to the next place, we got to thinking about our own ministries over the years and how there have been moments and seasons where we felt like we were three-star, man. We understood what it means to make disciples who make disciples. We had a deep desire in our heart to do it and would sacrifice for it. And then we intentionally created capacity. And then almost it's you almost hit kind of moments of, I don't know, mile markers or maybe we call them checkpoints where God calls you to a little bit deeper place, or he calls you to a different role, or you've just developed your network into a broader network, and you've moved through embracing the commission and identifying disciplable people, and it's time to launch disciple making communities, X groups. And then you're kind of almost back to square one. Like, I understand how to get off the island, embrace the commission of Jesus, change what I care about. I've even learned how to identify disciplable people. But do I really get how to do X groups? Do I really want to do X groups? Like, it's a whole new, aspect of ministry that I have to kind of adjust my life to. And then do I have capacity in my life to start launching X groups? And so you're almost right back where you started. And as we were just kind of processing that and thinking about it, we started thinking about kind of the life of the apostles, the capital A apostles, the 12. Particularly, we were talking about Peter, and we started to see this principle emerge in over the course of Peter's ministry. If you've listened to our simulcast and podcasts, you may have heard me kind of talk about this before because it's really dear to my heart. I felt like the Lord revealed it to me a couple of years ago in a really special way when I was in one of those checkpoint moments in my life. That Paul, we kind of think of the apostles, capital A apostles, the 12, as having a single call in their life, that God said, follow me. And they just followed. And that kind of just carried them all the way through to the end. But actually, particularly with Peter, he had moments in his ministry that God was calling him to a little bit different place or a little bit deeper place, and he had to revisit those questions again. Do I understand what Jesus is calling me to? Do I really want to sacrifice my life at the next level, more of my life to follow this call? And then how am I going to create capacity, whether that's knowledge, wisdom, time, energy? How am I going to create capacity in my life to follow the call that Jesus is calling me to? So I'm going to let Dan kind of go through some of those checkpoint moments for Peter, but it's the principle. We want to pull the principle out of this. It's not, it's not necessarily that we want to, lock into memory all these moments, but the principle is during the ministry of Peter and Peter's life, there were moments where God called him to a deeper place or a different place. And then Jesus sometimes even questioned Paul to create that tension. I'm sorry, Peter, to create that tension, to help him identify, do I really know what he's calling me to? Do I really want to sacrifice more in my life for this? And then is there some limitation of capacity that I have, whether that again is understanding or like capacity basically is how we manage our limited resources. So how can I free up more of a limited resource to chase after this call that he's given? So Dan, go through some of those checkpoint mile marker moments in Peter's life.
Well, the reason why we put the phases on here, because if we're not careful, we get caught up in phases. And the problem with phases is you get stuck in doing one area, but you really don't move well into the other parts of it. And so Peter is a great example, but you can also do it with Paul, because we have enough content on those two to see that those two actually had some similar kind of parallels. But so Peter comes in, and so Andrew brings Peter in. So Andrew embraces the commission of Jesus and says, "You got to meet my brother. I want you to meet." And so he invites him to follow Jesus. And so Andrew invites Peter in. And so then Jesus in Mark 1:17 says, "I want to make you fishers of men." And so he embraces the commission. And then pretty quickly they begin to move in the process of, they have to leave behind their houses and their mother and their wife, in Peter's case, their business. And he talks about who've given away houses and mothers and all those kind of things, and how much more you receive in the kingdom. And so there's this tension that happens in this process. And then, like all the 12, they go two by two, and they go out to find a green shoot. And when they find the green shoot, it begins to really change again. And so they have to go between the, do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have capacity for it? They had to increase capacity to become fishers of men. They had to increase their capacity as they began to go out and go find persons of peace. And then they had to increase their capacity to stay that oikos and develop it in the, when we talk about the multiplication, math and multiplication, they go from the 12 to the 72 to the 500. They had to create that capacity. And then the process is, Jesus has this meeting with Peter on the seashore, where he says, earlier he says, "Eat my flesh, drink my blood," challenges him at a deeper level. At the seashore, he tells him to feed my sheep. And so Peter has to, do I really want this? Do I get this? Do I have the capacity? And every place Jesus is trying to help this leader of disciples decide, does he have the capacity? Because capacity is the thing that we think we don't have for it. But one of the things I love, Kevin, in our last month simulcast is people almost all thought that they had a capacity problem. When I asked my cohorts, "So what do you think you struggle most with?" Every one of them said capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But then almost every one of them, as they began to talk about it, said, "I don't think it's capacity. I think it's don't really want it enough to create the capacity," which Jesus is trying to help his disciples to identify. If you're going to get capacity, you have to have the want it. The want it is what gives you the ability to mobilize to capacity. So you think about the Apostle Paul. He had the Damascus Road experience. We can go through the same exact situations, because Jesus knows that if he's going to have someone that has to move through this, they get it, they have to get it, they have to want it, and then the capacity has to come. And only the Holy Spirit and pain can create the capacity to mobilize his disciples. Even Paul talks about, well, Demas didn't create capacity, so he's gone. I mean, there were people that Jesus dealt with who walked away, after they eat my flesh, drink my blood, or they walked away, or even when he gives them the invitation to be in his core group. After they've been a disciple, they say, "Well, I've got some land. I got to work. I got a wife. I just married." And so in every place, capacity is a big issue. So we're going to look at capacity actually changes you can get capacity here and you think, I've got it. And then boom, this happens. And then you find the green shoot, and then you launch an extra, and then and so someone asked me again recently, I mentioned this last month. When did you finish detoxing? You detox at every single level, because every single level is the point that you have to create and identify capacity.
Yeah, that's great. So what are some of those, and we kind of walked through these, you and I, as we were preparing for this, but what are some of those like watershed moments in Peter's life where he realized that I had capacity in the last phase, but I've got to revisit, or I was a 3-star GWC in the last phase, but we're in a new phase now. And do have to ask himself, do I have the GWC for this next phase?
Well, Peter, we had a lot of experience with Peter, but then he gets over here near the end of his life there at Caesarea Philippi, and Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." Well, I mean, Jesus is near his crucifixion. He's preparing to go into Rome, and he has to go back and revisit. Peter, you've got to change what you care about. If you're gonna actually be over here at this level, you're not gonna be able to function at this level if you do not change what you care about. So I've said before, it's kind of like a flywheel or like a biplane. You grab the propeller of a biplane. And so it's like you take a couple shots at it, and you have to keep, and then you get back over here, and you have to come right back to, am I changing what I care about? And that's where you get some progress, and you think, I think I get it. I don't have the capacity. Well, maybe I don't really want it. I've got to change what I care about. And that is the part that we're going to talk about, how we're going to assist our leaders and guide them through this, because we kind of took an overview of it last time, but we want to drill down and actually take individual leaders, and in your cohorts, I'd like for you to actually start looking at who it is that you're coaching and you're working with that need to think through this process. And it's funny, in all my cohorts, several of them apologized and said, I had to teach it to my Accelerate gathering. I just had to teach it. That as soon as I found this, I love that. So you're applying it, and you felt like, you know, is it okay if I did it? Well, that's what this is for. But actually, not just your Accelerate gathering. If you stop at your Accelerate gathering, you're not going to get traction. You've got to take it into your sub coaching, because you're going to have to help them individually think through and help them craft a plan, just like Jesus masterfully helped Peter. And then I love how Jesus, in the resurrected form, takes Paul through this same process. Now, with the help of a transformed community around him as well. So he had some people around him working with it. But I think that's what we're hoping this month's Ignite Cast will do.
Yeah, it's great.
I have a couple of slides to show you here that may be helpful for us to think through. Um, as we go through this, what Kevin and I did, this is kind of like what we did with the Max. If you remember when you did module 4, maybe some of you have not done module 4, but there's model assist coach process that we see that has to be at every one of these, and same as we have to have a get it, want it capacity for it at the embrace the commission. And so, Kevin, most of our leaders, I think that they're people probably have done, if you've gone through at least one semester of Accelerate, you probably have gotten the embrace the commission, and you probably are maybe you're in the phase 1 conundrum, where they're learning spiritual conversations, they're getting good traction there. But I see this being a real problem. In fact, a lot of our Trojan elephant churches really do struggle with the phase 1 conundrum, because in the phase 1 conundrum, they get the spiritual conversations, they get it, want it, and have capacity for the commission. They get it, want to have the capacity for spiritual conversations. But what they start doing is they start reproducing this over and over again, this spiritual conversations piece. And you've got to move on and help them identify this disciplable green shoot. And if they don't get it, want it, and have capacity for the green shoot, they're going to get stuck over here in the phase 1 conundrum. And that would be, again, more for a Trojan elephant church. The question is, if you're an organic group, your organic group can also get stuck in just having, meetings or meeting with your disciple. You can get stuck in the one-on-one phase. How many times do we get stuck in the one-on-one phase where we've not really identified the first disciple? We've identified a disciplable person, but they're not the first disciple. And one of the things we talked about in this whole thing that we're doing, we're going to have to move people. We're going to move people up the mountain. you're going to have a first follower and a movement maker to go further up the mountain. You can't go up the mountain by yourself. And so, how many times have we found a person who's disciplable, but they really aren't a multiplying first disciple because they get stuck here? And so maybe they get it, they get what you're talking about. They say they want it, but they won't create the capacity to go out and find the other green shoots. So they really don't have the want it. They miss the want it piece. And so
Yeah, and
that,
that's a really great example of what we're talking about. That you may have really, really a group of really strong disciple makers who get it, want it, and have the capacity for the first two phases, but then you're all of a sudden you get to phase three where you've got to actually, put some feet on the ground and start, finding disciplable people, and you have to ask those questions to yourself again. And one thing that we talked about, and I think I lead two cohorts, and both of our cohorts was you have to start just as you start disciple making by being a disciple, you have to start with asking yourself these hard questions, right? So, for example, I'll just give you a real life example. In the Middle Tennessee network, we have some really great traction on all the way up through finding disciplable people and even seeing people come to know Jesus and having some green shoots. And now we're kind of stuck in the between the identifying disciple and launching communities conundrum. So I have to stop and ask myself, am I willing? Do I understand how? Do I get it? Do I have a desire, a deep, deep desire, and have I created capacity in my life to actually launch disciple making communities at the next level, multiply disciple making communities? And so we're even as a whole group, like we're even getting together tonight through Sunday, we're having a spiritual kind of prayer retreat, and we're asking that question is, are we all ready for the next phase of what the Lord's doing among us? And so when it comes to embracing the commission and changing what we care about and identifying disciple people, yes, we're 3-star GWCs, most all of us, but now we're having to ask the question again. We're going to the next phase. The Lord is calling us to a deeper call. Do we as a group are we 3-star in the GWC tool model? So yeah, it's like it's this cycle that cycles around, the example of Andrew calling Peter to follow Jesus. But then and that's great and exciting. And we feel like we found the Messiah, but then you find him on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, with his miraculous catch of fish. And Jesus said, "That's great, Peter. Now I'm going to change your identity. We're gonna shift from being fishers of fish to becoming a fisher of men. Do you have the GWC for this?" And then the next call we see for Peter was on Mount Arbel when Jesus was appointing the 12, right? Jesus was calling them to a deeper call. Are you going to follow me and be a leader that's going to help launch this new phase of the Christian church? Are you willing to pay the price to be a capital A apostle? I don't think Jesus said it that way, but the principle is. And he had to ask himself again, I had the GWC to become fishers of men. Now do I have the GWC to help lead this charge? And then eventually Jesus asked him to die the same death that he died for the sake of advancing the gospel. And that's a tough GWC, right? Like, yeah, I can become a fisher of men. I can follow Jesus and be an apostle. But now he's asking me to follow him in death. Do I have that? Where am I with my GWC for that call? And so we just cycle through deeper and deeper calls, and that's what we're kind of taking that and layering it on top of the disciple making cycle for Ignite. So, and one thing we want you to ask, if we're first going to be the disciple, and we're going to ask you first to apply this tool to yourself and ask the hard question, like, what is the next step forward for me in this disciple making process, building this network? And do I get it? Or do I need to go out and find resources that will help me get it better and understand what the next step is, what the next phase is, which would be our Ignite coaching, having a conversation with Dan, just going to the next level with your understanding. Then do I really want this? Do I have a desire to go to this next phase of launching disciple making communities? And then thirdly, what am I going to do? How am I going to rearrange my life in a way that I can create capacity? Or how am I going to take care of myself emotionally? How am I going to do self-care to have the emotional capacity to go to the next level? And so this always has to start, always. We first must be the disciple. So before we even start thinking about this in relation to our disciples, we have to ask ourselves these hard questions, right? And then we have the credibility and the authority to ask these questions to our disciple makers.
Absolutely. And as Jesus would take Peter through this, he knew it was going to require pain. And so you yourself may have gone through some of these elements, but what happens is when you've done those things, it's almost always been pain that got you into the network and got you thinking through these. But we get stuck right here so oftentimes because it's harder. It's easy to have spiritual conversations because that kind of associates with our evangelism understandings. But this is different because you're really having to find that first disciple, that person who's really gonna follow, and you're really looking for a person like yourself. And it's much easier to kind of do evangelism where you kind of get a person who'll just, I mean, we lowered the bar on the sinner's prayer and on the evangelism piece so much that really we weren't really finding disciplable people. We were just finding church people. But this is a different level, and people are going, holy, this is harder than just the church thing. And so that's where on this sheet that we've got attached to the show notes is you list leaders you're going to pray for and coach through each part of the cycle. And so what does, and put their name in there, Justin, Jennifer, whoever it is, Ashley, need to move through which module is it? 1, 2, 3, and then underneath that, put the plan. You need to be writing. I want you to write in the notes because we put 7 spaces for 7 different people that you could. What do they have to do? What are you going to do? And how are you going to coach them? How are you going to sub coach them? And this really is, if we don't have sub coaching, this isn't going to work. This get it, want it capacity, GWC, they're not going to actually ever find disciplable people. Jesus had to take his disciples and had to really, he took them to Mount Arbel and said, I'm going to appoint 12. And they put them into this 18-month training cycle. And that was the real goal of that training cycle was for them to go out and find the green shoot, the person of peace. And then for them to begin to launch from their oikos group, their intensified multiplication group, which we would call an X group. And then but it wasn't done until they actually were unleashing these worshiping communities, and they had never seen this. I mean, Jesus had to show them, but there was this whole process of the GWC that was happening here. And when you get stuck, this conundrum right here is the one that is the biggest cul-de-sac we get stuck in. So you're going to have to, if your people are not leading well or moving well into this phase, it's because you're not leading well. Who is the green shoot? And then how are their X groups going? And if there's no green shoots, you're not going to get effective X groups. And if there's not effective X groups, you're never going to unleash multiplying communities. And this is the multiplication is the metric that we talk about all the time because it is the metric that we say we want it, but we really oftentimes don't want to create the time to sub coach, and it goes back into the more core elements that we've got to be paying attention to.
Mm-hmm. So good. So just to make it a little bit more practical, and actually to share a little bit of a testimony, I think actually what season that the Ignite network is in right now is a checkpoint moment for us, right? So I think over the last year and a half, we started asking the question, are we producing disciple teachers or disciple makers, right? We started really questioning kind of what we have reproduced over the years for a long time. What, 14 years, Dan? I mean, I know you've been doing it for a long time, but the Ignite network for 14 years. So
14, right.
I think we hit a watershed moment where we said, we built an executive team and we asked the question together, like there's things changing. There's things changing in our financial model, our training model. We're starting to see less fruitfulness. And so I think the Lord put our feet to the fire and asked us, do you want to go to the next level as a network, as a family of disciple making networks? Do you want to go to the next level? And we asked that question to our executive team. Hey guys, what do we want to do? You know, is the season changing for us or is God asking us to go to the next place? And we determine that we want to do this. We believe in what we've done. We get it. I think we get what we want to do. But we had to ask that question to each other. Do we want to go to the next level? And then what we realized was, in order to go to the next level, we've got to create a different kind of capacity, because Dan Greider can't continue to individually coach dozens and dozens of people. Like, we're going to have to create a new capacity, a new container that will facilitate scaling and growth and really multiplying communities. And so that's what we did, is we went to this cohort model, which is, if everybody, instead of everybody coming together on a simulcast once a month, we have multiple cohorts multiplying. And so we actually, I think as a network, we had a checkpoint moment over the last year and a half. Do we want to go to the next place? And if we do, how are we going to create a capacity to do that?
And Jesus would say things like, you've got to take up your cross. You have to die to yourself. You have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And then he was saying, if you want to leave, you can leave like the other guys too. And there's this point where we had to make a decision. I mean, I had to stop running all over the country doing individual live cohorts and being and diversify and to have other people leading cohorts. And so it's there's a certain death of pride that has to happen with me. Well, okay, why am I saying that? Because with your culture, there's a certain death of pride that has to happen as well. You have to
Yes.
stop being the person who is everybody's coming to for this, and you have to start having sub coaching and empowering other people to sub coach and releasing this. And without that process, you're going to get stuck. Just like, I mean, even as a network, we talk and teach this, but really,
We're
we were
living
getting
it.
stuck in this phase one
Yeah.
conundrum right here.
Yeah, that's really, really good. So, kind of just to get get you thinking and to create a little bit of tension in you personally. These are 4 bullet points, Dan. I don't even think we talked about this, but I'm going to just go with them. 4 bullet points that I kind of thought through and sketched out for us to think about as cohorts. Number 1, there's no shame in being at that pivot point, that checkpoint. And sometimes we feel a lot of shame because we don't even know how to answer the question, do I really want this, right? But it's normal and it's natural. And we see it in Peter's life and Paul's life, and really every capital A apostle's life. We saw these pivot points where Jesus gave them a really, really hard saying, and they had to sit and determine, am I going to really keep moving forward in this thing? Am I going to really get it, want it, and have the capacity to do it and move forward with this? And so if you're in that space where you really, God has taken you and you've seen some fruit, or maybe you've seen no fruit and you're frustrated with the lack of growth, you may be in one of those checkpoint moments when the Lord is asking you specifically. Maybe you've been through it 1, 2, 3, 4 times, 4 cycles in the past, but you may be cycling again into a season where the Lord is asking you, do you get this? Do you really want this? And are you going to create capacity to do it? And oftentimes, Dan, we mentioned this when we were just talking before the recording, but this is a very vulnerable place to be related to the dip. Many times when you see the dip happening in people's life, it's those checkpoint mile marker moments where the Lord is asking you to go to the next place.
Yeah. And so we all know the dip. We've even heard and had this coached. If you're in your cohort have not ever heard of the dip, then you should talk about this. But when you begin, this peak that you think you're going to have actually is going to be higher later, but you have to go through this time. So Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane had to actually hit this dip. Paul reminds us that if you hit the dip and you bail out, then your condition is worse than the first. That's not a good place. That's a very dangerous place. So the dip is dangerous, but without the dip, you never ever get back up here. And this obviously this dip is higher than this peak. And as it goes up here, this dip is higher than this peak. So and it's just the what, but you can even Peter was a pretty high level leader, and on the Sea of Galilee, he denied Jesus, and he was about to bail at the dip right here. That, I mean, how much would we have lost in the kingdom of God? I mean, there's a possibility you and I might not have known about the gospel if Paul had bailed out, if Peter had bailed out. I mean, so thank Jesus, thank you, Holy Spirit, that people didn't bail out and that we've been able to hear it. So there's what's at stake in this dip. It's huge, but
Yeah.
the pain of the dip is something you're going to have to help your people. And maybe you're in a dip right now because this is
hmm
hard stuff. This
Yeah.
is challenging things.
And it's funny because we generally naturally ask these questions when we're in a dip. If you've ever been in a really hard place, the first question you start asking yourself is, do I really want to do this? There's your W. So you
There's your one.
naturally, there's
Yep.
this natural tendency to ask these questions in the dip, right? Or do I really have time to do this? Or do I really have the money to do this? Or do I really have the emotional energy to do this? Those are all capacity questions. So you naturally go to these GWC questions. Do I know how to do this? Do I know how to get to the next place would be a get it piece, right? So these are the natural questions, and the Lord wants us to steward our dip. He wants us to utilize it to motivate us to get the help that we need. So reach out and get the help that you need. Secondly, actually, I may only have 3 bullet points. I said 4. Secondly, who in your disciple making culture is currently at a checkpoint moment in their disciple making journey? And that could be a person that is just trying to get off the attractional island, just trying to embrace the commission of Jesus, right? Or it could be someone that's already developed all the way around and they're ready to start intensifying multiplication. So, who with each of your, and this is the exercise that Dan just showed you just a moment ago, with the people in your disciple making community, we've got to know where they are in this GWC cycle at each checkpoint along the disciple making journey. Because if we expect them to be a GWC 3 steps down the journey, you may actually have a GWC on your hands at step 1. But if you're expecting them to be a GWC at step 4, you're going to get discouraged and frustrated with them. So they may be a 3-star disciple maker right in your midst that you don't recognize as a 3-star because you're expecting them to be farther down the cycle than the Lord has them right now. So you have to evaluate each of your individual leaders and disciple makers and know where they are in the disciple making cycle, and then apply the GWC tool to that cycle. Because a GWC in Embrace the Commission of Jesus looks very different than a GWC who's ready to start intensifying multiplication. So know where they are in the cycle and evaluate them as the 1, 2, 3-star based on where they are, not based on where you would love for them to be. So Jesus travels it. I've really embraced this idea lately. The last few months, I heard it probably 6 months ago that what I have failed to do in my ministry is to travel at the speed of Jesus, right? I'd like to travel at the speed of Kevin. And sometimes Jesus is going much slower than I would prefer. And I have to slow down and join him. And sometimes he's way out ahead of me. And I'm like, slow down, Jesus. But yeah, how can we, with each of our individual disciple makers, how can we, with their disciple making journey, travel at the speed of Jesus?
Yeah. And one thing I really would love for you to think about, okay, we're at the end of May. So if you're in an existing cycle with an Accelerate gathering, you're going to need, there's some things we need to have to talk about. You need to be preparing for the summer. You need to be preparing to have some conversations with people who aren't getting this. If you're going to be launching this in the fall, there's a whole set of things. I really want you to begin this summertime with a half day of prayer, because a half day of prayer gives you the ability to begin to see, do you have a want it problem for the fall? Do you have a capacity problem where, and I would love for you to take this sheet that we've given you, and I'd love for you to not just take it today and just do it today, but I'd love for you to take this and begin to think through each of the people that are here that you have. List all the people, the leaders that you're going to be praying for and coaching through, and take that into your half day of prayer. What does it? Put their name and build a plan for what the Holy Spirit. Ask the Holy Spirit, what do you need me to do? How are we going to move this person forward? Or have they shown that they're not disciplable in this season, and you just need to step back for them and create distance? But this would be an important plan for you going into the summer, in the month of May, in the May Ignite cast, for you to think, because it's going to set the course for you for the next 3 months, because you're going to go into a time where you're not meeting regularly, but you're going to have to, it's that piece that it's in when you're lifting weights. It's not the tearing the muscle and straining the muscle that grows. It actually grows in the rest season. And so your culture is going to be growing in this rest season of the summertime, and it's going to be a really key time for you.
So number one, where are you in this cycle, this GWC cycle, and where are you going to get help in the places where you're weak? Number two, where are each of your individual disciple makers in this process, and how can you help them move to the next space? And then thirdly, we already talked about this is the most vulnerable place for the dip, but we would recommend that you ask the hard question, who in my circle, whether that's me or my first tier disciple makers or my second generation disciple makers or beyond, who in my circle is extremely vulnerable for the dip and for not being able to push through the dip right now, and then how can I help them get through the dip? So that's a little bit different than identifying where they are. That identifying where they are is important so you know how to equip them, but identifying who's very vulnerable and who could fall out of your network or kind of implode on themselves is a different issue. Like, because they need a little bit of extra attention, a little bit of extra care to support them to push through the dip. So those are three things I thought would be really good takeaways in addition to the and it all ties together, but in addition to the worksheet that you're going to have in the show notes at the bottom, the Ignite Cast notes at the bottom of this video. So yeah, so that's I think that's probably enough, Dan, for this month to talk about, probably more than enough. So we're excited about the cohorts and what we're hearing coming out of the cohorts and just the excitement and energy that we're seeing. So any last minute thoughts before we finish up this month's Ignite Cast, Dan?
Can't wait to see you guys in your cohorts. Love you
All
guys.
right. Sounds good. You guys know where to find us. If you need anything, ignitedisciplemaking.com. We're currently still using the Mighty Networks app for our training platform, but just so you know, we are probably a third of the way through building a brand new platform that'll be much easier to navigate and point your disciple makers to get training. So look forward to seeing you. You guys know where our Facebook page is, Ignite Disciple Making on Facebook. And we thank you for being part of what we do. Excited for what the Lord's going to do this month. So we'll see you next month.